Ari, welcome. Good to see you, and thank you for your contribution to the Legacy Journal. A more robust welcome is needed for our immigrant students and their families.
Thanks, Walter. It's great to have had the opportunity to share this piece, which feels like one of the more important ones I've written in recent years.
It was wonderful, and it became our advocacy focus for the issue because it's just so timely and so on point. The last time we spoke was before the election, so much has changed, and we now know more change is coming in the next 4 years. So this couldn't have been more relevant for readers. So much about immigration in the United States is based in wherever we live. We know who we see at the grocery store, we know who we see at the soccer field. And so a lot of it is very personal and very local. And yet you come out of the gate in your article saying there's like 20 million children in this country that have at least one immigrant parent. That's 27% of the children. I mean, bam, that hits you right there. It's like, okay, this is not just who I see at the grocery store. This is a real number that's a quarter of the population.
Yeah,
Um,
and since I came across that research a year or two ago,
yeah.
I learned a week or two ago that we've literally had more immigration in the last 2 or 3 years than any 2 or 3 year window in our country's history. So it does feel like, regardless of our opinions on immigration and policy, the reality is these families that had a yearning around the American dream and their kids are in our schools and they impact the school community. And so to me, it's a no-brainer in terms of if we build stronger bridges and trust and connection, they're going to thrive. They're going to be a positive influence for other members of a school community. And everyone will feel more connected instead of this kind of us and them mentality, which I don't think in our country's history has really served us very well since the very beginning.
It's so true, and no different than when our families came to this country. I mean, I have roots in Russia and Ireland. I mean, you talk about melting pots. Our families come from all over the world, and when they came, my oral tradition is families hit the docks in Boston and in Newfoundland and then migrated down. And they had to start from scratch. There was no welcoming committee. There was no easy way in. It was very difficult. And that's the tradition. And so this isn't partisan. We're not going to talk what side of the fence anybody is on politically, as you kind of alluded to. It doesn't matter where you stand in the spectrum. The reality is we have a wonderful array of cultures that come to this country, and we need to support them and help them to be successful. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate, Walter, you bringing in the personal, because for me, the article and the work I do with the Families and Educator Together teams is on one level really deeply personal, in that my four grandparents were all immigrants. And my maternal grandmother actually wrote her life history for my senior thesis in college.
Wow.
And, she, as a Jew living in the Ukraine in the early 1900s, she fled because her teachers made her life miserable because she was a Jew. And at 15, she left her entire family, didn't see many of them ever again, and made a ton of sacrifices so that my mom could have opportunities in education and beyond. So to me, I kind of want to pass forward that same spirit of support and generosity that my grandparents received once they came to this country.
It's so true. And I think we forget that because, again, as Americans, and I'm probably going to sound like I'm being hard on us, but we have such a good life and we assume so many things that when we see new generations of people coming in from all over the world, no different than our ancestors, um, we see that there's some kind of a difference between us and others. And there's really not. If anything, we probably have a moral responsibility to help others because that's how we got here. Um, I'm in Virginia. You're in Colorado. How does that look and feel to you these days? I know you do a lot of work and you write in the article about your work starting the Families and Educators Together teams. Um, what is that like as an educator to create those teams? Do you find that most people on the ground where you live and work are happy to become a part of a team and learn and self-discover and up their own game to help others? What does that feel like?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a couple of things come to mind. One is that Denver, which is just half an hour away, was one of the cities that had the most amount of immigrants in this last year or two. We have one of our schools locally where literally, Walter, we had 25 new students, mostly from Venezuela and Mexico,
Mm,
in a 6 week period last school year. And
mm,
I'd say those families deeply deeply embrace FET. And one thing I'll just say before talking about the benefits for them is
yeah,
that the school community, do we benefit if families come in and they feel disconnected, lost, marginalized, their students don't thrive. It puts more of a toll on the school staff if there's a sense of fragmentation. So to me, there's this case of if we do a warm, steady welcome, it really benefits everyone, including the school's reputation and all those test scores, all those pieces that everyone cares about.
yeah,
Um, and in terms of the families, I mean, what we saw last year and again this year is they often feel disconnected and they're going through, of course, all the elements of settling into a new town, new country, new school system. And
yeah,
so that warm welcome is really appreciated. I mean, a lot of them say, I'm so relieved and thrilled to have this space of the FET teams. And some of our schools even took it a step further last year, which was let's do a 6 week training for newcomer families on different topics each week. And 20 plus families came out for that. So I found that when we really front load the investment in relationship and communication, the families do come. And the teams are a space where we can also learn steadily, like how do we better meet their needs? We
right,
can be, for instance, sending emails with boatloads of information that none of them are reading. And when we create a space like the FET teams to hear their voices, they'll tell us, oh, well, yeah, if you text us that information or if you print it and send it home,
right.
it'll benefit us, it'll serve us, and we'll be able to reach out. So yeah, it's been really affirming that we need to create these spaces. And my worry and my passion is that more school communities around the country need to create these spaces, whatever they call their teams, and
Right.
that it's not just about them learning about our schools, which is really valuable. It's also learning from them how to better partner with them.
It's so true. And when I asked the question, it was really a loaded question because I've traveled all 50 states in the course of my career. Everywhere I've gone, people are open and welcoming. The things we tend to see in the news that tend to be more contentious and controversial. When I walk off an airplane or walk out of an Uber into a hotel, that's not the reality of people on the ground. People on the ground are open to other people. People on the ground want to be helpful. It's just our nature. And so the idea that you've created this vehicle of FET teams that in a specific school or district, you can say, here's a way to think about this, and here's a structure that helps you to make it successful. So that all that just natural goodwill and willingness to be kind and open to other people can actually take root is an amazing gift you're offering to everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, well, and it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Field of Dreams. I was just
Yeah,
thinking, like, if you build it, they will come.
right,
This idea that, contrary to that, if we don't create spaces and we're just inviting them to the regular school events, often they're not coming to the school events because of fear of not knowing anyone, the lack of possibly interpreters being there, all kinds of reasons. And so it really makes a dramatic difference to create an intentional space and for the relationship building and for them to share in their own language. I mean, all these pieces that we often forget about or take for granted. And then when we on the back end blame them for not coming to the events, we often haven't done enough on the front end to let them know that we are caring partners that really value them. So yeah, I've learned a lot from the families that have shared their needs and their ideas in recent years.
and it's everything you're saying, and it's so much more because we're having larger conversations just about how education needs to be transformed at a very high level because society has changed. And so we're no longer an industrial aged era. We're in a digital age, everything's moving really fast, and schools are still plodding along from models 50 and 100 years ago that just in general aren't keeping up with society. And what has the answer been loud and clear every time we've held a panel, every time we get people together to have this discussion, is that you have to bring the community in and let them inform what the needs are, how to best serve the populations in the community. And until we start doing that, the idea of transformation is kind of pie in the sky because we're doing what we've always done. We're not bringing in the expertise of the people we're serving to help us understand what they need.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like how you're talking about transformation. I mean, I'm thinking breaking that word down, like changing the form of how we do things. And for all that public education has done well, there is this element of we preserve the status quo and the way we've done it, as you said, for decades. And part of what fueled Walter these teams in the early days 7 years ago was really this acknowledgement, which I'm curious for those that are listening, if this would be true for their school district as well, was we saw that we had been guessing for decades what immigrant families needed,
Right.
despite the fact that many of us don't have much background knowledge because we as educators were mostly born in the US. And we realize we're guessing what they need instead of asking, listening, and then transforming based on what they've said. And it sounds simple, but in the overstretched, overwhelmed world of public education, we just don't tend to create space to be with families like this. And I think that's the shift that's needed. And we're talking 90 minutes once a month, and it's only involving a handful of staff. And it's pretty darn uplifting too. People walk out. I mean, that's what I love about the FET teams. People walk out and say, I don't like going to night meetings typically, but this one I always feel uplifted and my heart feels full, has been a regular comment. So yeah.
Eh, Absolutely. And, as educators, as we talk this through, we're thinking about the immigrant families and what they can bring to it and what they can take from it. But I know from getting to know your work, a lot of this is how the educators have these ahas and eyes are open and minds are open because they're having conversations for the first time, sitting across the table from people who are helping them understand things they couldn't even begin to consider for what you said. There's not enough time in a day, there's not enough resources in the system. If you ask, then all of a sudden you might have to act on something. But if you're just having a nice dinner and talking over a table, it's much easier and less threatening and less of a sense of what are they going to say and what do we have to, how do we respond? It's much more human to human.
Yes. Yeah. No, I really appreciate you saying that. And it inspires in me like want to just share that while I love reading, I mean, I'm a passionate reader and I'm also a huge fan of professional learning as a participant and as someone who leads sessions.
Yeah,
The in-person experiential learning, like you're saying, of being with families often has a depth to it that really is transformational. And, I may have shared this with you in past conversations, but teachers' main area research shows of least confidence is in connecting with parents in general. And,
right.
and we haven't been trained a lot on how to do it anyways. So there's that in play. And so I'm a deep believer, like you're saying, when we ask parents questions, the ways we become more culturally literate, culturally responsive, is really impactful. And that's a piece that I'm often regularly having to remind my colleagues of with our teams, which is yes, we need to have this be a learning space for families. And yes, we've overall not done a great job reaching immigrant families with information that's accessible to them about how to navigate our school. But that's not the sole or primary purpose of FET teams. If anything, we should be learning more from them than they're learning from us. And when that happens, yeah, I mean, we work more efficiently, more caringly, and in smarter ways where we're not spending an hour writing some lengthy newsletter. We're spending 10 minutes. They actually read it. And that's a win-win, which we're often not even exploring a lot of those opportunities because we're, again, so busy and stuck in that more status quo approach to things in education.
It's true. And I'm thinking back to my days in schools on faculties where, yeah, we always, no matter what the topic, we had our early adopters. I'll say technology, because back in my day, that was what was just coming into schools. So, you had the early adopters, and everybody looked to them to maybe show us how to use a new tool or how to think about a new kind of technology and instruction. And then you had people who were kind of reluctant, nervous, and didn't have the confidence to get in front of a group of students and try to model something, or be afraid it wouldn't work, or they might misspeak or make a mistake. And they would come along. And then you have those that just kind of, it takes more time. And isn't that exactly the same process in what we're talking about, in that you're going to have people on any given faculty who maybe already speak a second language fluently, and maybe even live in that community, and so are very comfortable, and they know the players as they come in, they can welcome them and they're familiar. And then there are others who are coming in feeling like a fish out of water, and well, I really don't know that community. And if someone speaks to me in another tongue, I won't even know how to politely say, I'm sorry, I don't speak that language, or do you speak English, or how do we
Mhm.
make this work? So there's so many variables, and so much of it is personal,
Yeah.
that do you find that that's where a lot of the challenge is, just winning hearts and minds because of the unknown?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what I've found is that if we can get educators in the door, they regularly gain comfort with that discomfort.
Yeah.
That if they're in a small group with a family and we've got an interpreter there, one of us that's bilingual supporting, they start feeling more and more comfortable in their vulnerability. And it's been really important to be strategic around how do we get them in the room, knowing they'll have a positive experience. And I'd say, one of our high schools came up with one of the best ideas, which I think is relevant for schools beyond FET teams, which is ask educators to come once a year. And essentially, we get regulars from the staff on our teams, but then we have 3 people a month sign up. And that way, they build their comfort, their cultural responsiveness, and often come back more than once. But it honors their busy, professional and personal lives. And it honors families who've, consistently told us, Walter, over the years with FET teams, if you really want me to trust you all as a staff and communicate, I need to meet more than 4 or 5 of you. And so, doing the math, if they meet 27 staff members in addition to the regulars, that's a way to really start building some authentic bridges. And yeah, and the educators see, okay, it's not that awkward. And ooh, I'm putting on a headset to understand this meaning. This is how families feel when they come to back to school night or all these other events. So it builds, yeah, a sense of empathy and respect and understanding that wouldn't, I think, happen often otherwise.
The aha you shared about texting as opposed to email, which to us they're like interchangeable just because they're text-based. But speaking to someone from another culture, and it may be because they're working 3 jobs and they're just not available to be sitting in front of an open email client.
Mhm.
Um, that's such a, oh, well, if it's that simple, if I just have to get on my texting client instead of my email client, I can do that. That's not a backbreaker. Other ahas like that you, off the top of your head, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but other things like that kind of come out over time that you could share with us, that are examples of the benefit of just these open conversations and what comes out?
Yeah. Well, to build on the text example, in addition to we default to email, there's been the benefits of, a teacher telling me a few weeks ago, I spent 2 weeks trying to track a parent down for a conference. I sent her a text via talking points, and 5 minutes later, we'd landed our time.
Yeah.
So the ease, speed, another teacher who said, I'm going on a field trip tomorrow. It was too late at 9:30 when I had someone cancel to call families or to email them and expect them to get it that night. I texted a few families. We got our volunteer, before going to bed. So there's that. I'm also thinking about, with parent teacher conferences, a big aha we heard from many families was, if we have an interpreter, we're losing half of that time that other families get.
Right.
Take our conference and just expand it from 20 to 30 minutes, and then treat us a little more as the experts. I mean, the irony, and I know I was one of these teachers. I was guilty of it. Of like, I've known your kid now for 7 weeks in October, and I'm
Right.
going to be the expert to tell you how they are and how they're doing.
Right.
Whereas you've had them for 8 years, since they were born. So creating space to treat them as experts on their kid, learn from them. That's been a clear aha. And the final one that comes to mind just off the cuff is for educators, the pathways to communicate so that families will build trust and even attend our school events. I mean, in a nutshell, and I'm going to write a piece on this these next few weeks. I learned this fall, it was really reinforced with a high school where we were getting 2 to 3 parents for FET gatherings. And I said, let's put in place everything we've learned from other schools about front loading communication. And it was a thrill. They got 32 parents at their September FET gathering. And a lot of it was multiple channels of communication, not leaning solely on email, personalized phone calls, texts, flyers, just 7 approaches instead of 2 that really honored the ways that families have told us they need communication.
I was talking to someone recently whose area of expertise is new language learning and education. And they were just kind of speaking from their passion, and they hit me with something that wasn't a surprise, but I hadn't thought of it. And it's that at the rapid rate that technology and AI are moving, it's not going to be too long from now that language is just going to become incidental. It won't even be an issue anymore because 2 people speaking very different languages will be able to talk without needing a third person to be the translator anymore. And without having the language being a barrier, the understanding will be immediate. And the idea that you have to learn the other language will no longer be required to have those conversations. I was like, of course that's coming. And what a breakthrough that will be. I mean, language has always been that first barrier when you meet someone and you realize, oh, we can't just talk in one language or the other because we don't know each other's language.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you're making me think, Walter, like when the language barrier is ideally taken away, are we ready to
Yeah,
navigate the other barriers, right? I mean, one, I'm thinking about research recently I came across that said as much as 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So how are we making families feel when they walk in the door through our nonverbal communication? And when we can talk without the language barrier, how are cultural or other barriers still impeding the sense of ease on both sides for the educator and the family member? And that's why if I'm hopeful, based on what you said, if the language barrier is going to dissipate over the next few years, then
yeah,
we should use the time we have now to build our confidence in navigating kind of both the cultural barriers as well as that I'm a teacher and I'm maybe not a parent and
right.
you are a parent. How can we build a sense of common rapport?
I love the way you said that because so much, and this is again my perceptions and understandings, so many other cultures that come to this country, educators are held in rather high regard in their home countries. And so they come here with that level of respect. And it's really going to be important that we reflect that same respect back as
Yeah,
parents and
yeah,
as people coming who bring their own diversity and wealth of experience and ideas to our American education system. And so being able to reciprocate that in the nonverbal ways, in the attitudes and in the dispositions is we give ourselves
yes.
away otherwise. It's a big deal.
Yeah, well, and I'm remembering the big word that we use in our country around immigrants, which is assimilation. And you're getting me thinking about, in creating these bridges,
Yeah,
there's no right way or right answer, but to me, it's this blend of helping families understand the way we do things.
yeah,
And sometimes, I mean, I think it's this art of balancing that, where, for instance, they know um, you're able to drop your kid off at the door of this elementary classroom. You can say hello. Many of our parents say, I didn't know I was allowed to talk to the teacher or allowed to
yeah.
call them. So helping them adapt to some of our systems while also being willing to shift some of our ways of being in schools to honor their cultural preferences that yeah. And so that of course requires mutual learning, not just this like you will conform to our way of being. That's not going to build very caring bridges.
It's not. And we also assume, and this goes back to the whole idea of the industrial age model, we also assume they have to come into our brick and mortar buildings and that everything is focused there. And I think we're seeing across society, and I don't just mean American society, that everything's becoming decentralized, that even authority itself is becoming much more distributed, and the way people think and work and even play is no longer that kind of, use the word centralized already, but coming to the mountain all the time.
Yeah.
So if education becomes more decentralized, where everything doesn't have to happen in the school building itself, will that help with this kind of getting away from assimilation to our way of doing things and going more out into the community, not just to meet, but to learn, to have a trade and work with an expert and not just sit in the classroom for 12 years and do the traditional kind of assembly line model of moving through the grades until you get your diploma and after 12 years. Do you think that will be an asset to all of this process? Or is that extra levels of complication and difficulty if we become more decentralized?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, my initial response is it'll be harder and that it'll force us as educators to deal with a new layer of complexity that maybe we're not
Yeah.
experienced with of how do I go out and forge business partnerships that my students can take advantage of? How do I take the risk that's going to be well rewarded to schedule a home visit with the family, which we know is, a family engagement best practice. So I think complicated on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think it'll be richly rewarding. I mean, I know recent pieces I've read about education in the New York Times have talked about project-based, taking students into the community, more real world experience. And I'm thinking about on the family side, I was at a FET gathering a few weeks ago, and this I think is a beautiful example of like blending the assimilation tendency and reaching out to learn from families. Was we held a conversation around how do you read with your child at home? And the teacher leader, as a mom, shared some of her strategies and talked about here's some of the things we do at school. But we really centered also the parent voices so they could learn from each other what works for you and what's challenging when you try to read with your kid at home. And to me, that's to use your word, like that's decentralizing, because the de facto way would be we're going to spend the next 15 minutes teaching you how to read with your kid at home so you can learn the school way and the school
Right,
strategies, and
right.
use a bunch of acronyms too so you'll feel a little intimidated and shaky as you try to do it. So
Yep.
yeah, that does make me hopeful.
It's such a great conversation. It is the new year. What are you looking forward to this year? Any exciting opportunities or new directions you're going in 2025?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. And yeah, I'm thinking about an article I read recently that even said, like instead of looking at it as one year, what matters over the next, 3 to 5 years. Another piece I read was, if you're on your deathbed and you were looking back, like what would hold the most meaning for you if you focused on. And so I would say, my daughter's a little more than 2 years old. She's a delight and a challenge. And to me, she's a top priority. I wanted her for 2 decades, and it was a
Right.
long journey to parenthood.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And then yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, I see the need, of course, in pretty much every school community around the country to have these teams and create these spaces. So I'm doing some work in a couple different districts in California this spring, and really hoping to find new partners that are ready to take their school or their district to a higher level of authentic family engagement. So I would say, yeah, those are two. And the final one, Walter, would be on a personal note is,
Yeah.
just more time for silence. I've lately, in the snow the other day, walking with my dog, I realized, wow, the stimulus of so much technology and screen time in my day. I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, so I'm thinking about Thoreau at this moment. Like, there's something to be gained by taking some kind of baby steps back towards a life with a little more silence infused into it. It'll make me a better human being and just, uh, yeah, more effective and more content day to day.
Well said. Yeah, I did not realize the Massachusetts connection. I was born in the Back Bay and grew up in Northborough, and it's funny we're here in Virginia and Colorado catching up all these years later.
Yes, yeah,
Very
absolutely.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're excited to keep following you on your journey, to learn from you, and to continue to support you in your work, Harry. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Walter. It's great being a part of the Worthy Educator community, and I'm excited. Hopefully, readers will reach out with thoughts, comments, questions, and engage because this is a critical crossroads, especially around immigration in our school system. So excited to hear from people.